It probably looks a little indecent that a marketing person comes to tell something to people who are computer science specialists. I am partly excused by the fact that, generally speaking, I am not a marketer by education. I do not like marketers by education. He graduated from Phys Tech, defended himself in a chicken coop, and in that era when the word internet did not exist yet, he was quite a man from the field of natural sciences and, in fact, dealt with difficult issues of experimental physics, any nonlinearity in laser plasma and so on. Therefore, as a matter of fact, when it became bad with experimental physics in the collapsed Soviet Union, but the internet appeared. It seemed to me scary, funny, terribly interesting, and I preferred to go there. I suddenly discovered that what is called marketing, I didn't know that word then. Generally speaking, it is a normal experimental, empirical science. If we approach it as an empirical science, then in general, all the tools that I have been doing, really exploring all sorts of nonlinear processes in surface laser plasma, all this methodological and mathematical apparatus is absolutely applicable. Because, strictly speaking, yes, forgive me, you are all internet users, I hope you all are. You're generally such a highly nonlinear, but pretty well modeled environment. With very unpredictable responses sometimes, but this is where a very interesting story about how to predict something begins. And I mostly tell about this with examples mainly from marketing, oddly enough. Although in the end it will be like another interesting parallel with my ancient physics past, because when I started doing laser technology, for a long time I was quite such a very secret physicist. For the simple reason that these were the times when the Americans were engaged in a large project called the Strategic Defense Initiative. In the vernacular, in the jargon of journalists, it was called Star Wars. And as part of this project, options were considered, and can lasers be used for serious space warfare? Then, it would seem, when I went online, I began to engage in mass public services in Yandex. God, how far it's gotten. All these secret studies, all these ways to destroy, if not people, then at least enemy equipment in space. It's funny that now the circle has closed and the story about machine learning, about modern computer solutions, has suddenly become terribly interesting again in the purely military field. But we will talk about this at the end of the lecture. In the meantime, let's start with what I, in fact, like most of all, as a person who, in a sense, sells technology to users, people, millions of people. I like this well-known classical statement. This is the third of the so-called Arthur C. Clarke laws. I hope everyone in this audience knows Clarke, has heard his last name. Well, that's good. Indeed, any well-developed technology is practically indistinguishable from magic. Imagine there, I don't know, a person from the middle of the last century, or even better from the year before last, who suddenly saw you using a smartphone. Well, absolute magic. A man walks through the forest, muttering something into a box. He sat down on a stump, watching a movie. At that time, there was no film cinema at all. That is, a normal schizo from a fairy tale. That is, there in the fairy tale it was some kind of pot into which you had to bend down and see a reflection of something there among the vapors. Well, if your own, and then the event that happens next. A normal fairy tale. You have it in everyone's pocket right now. Now it's a little harder for us to sell a fairy tale, because it seems that we believe in the omnipotence of machines. Not like that. In fact, an interesting story begins here. Then what you are doing now is very different from both magic and science in the usual sense of the word. Do you know this character? What's your name? And this. Great, at least you are somewhat familiar with modern folklore. Note that I have specially selected pictures where they hold their serious tool in their hands. Well, you know, why the staff? As if it helps to carry out some magical actions. Strictly speaking, they use the staff the way a classical traditional scientist uses some kind of scientific device. The staff itself is a rather useless thing in the absence of a magician. It helps him to strengthen. A staff, in the sense of helping a magician, strengthen some of his magical skills, knowledge, gift. Whatever you want, but it is, generally speaking, a tool. He doesn't replace a wizard. Gandalf cannot leave a staff in his place. Go quietly on vacation. The staff, solve all problems without him. Even in traditional magic, as it is described by our favorite writers and filmed by our favorite directors, man remains the king of everything. We are slowly entering a period when these black boxes often do not need a person. This is a real photo from our server room. It doesn't matter. There are a lot of such servers in the world now. Tens of thousands, somewhere hundreds of thousands of servers. It doesn't matter. Google, Amazon, Yandex, Yahoo. They, generally speaking, do a good job. And I will mainly talk about this today without our participation. Well, that is how. It is clear that in the beginning we asked them to do something, and then, this is where the fun begins. There is such a classic curve that any people involved in innovation, modern technology, just have to know. This is such a cycle of innovation development. Gartner publishes changes every year, as these dots do not go along the curve. That is, I see, right? At first, this stage, when something suddenly arose, and there are a lot of discussions, fantasies, dreams about how it will end. It reaches a certain peak. Then, and it always happens, it starts. Journalists call it the Valley of Death, a more formal name. This is such a gap, disappointment. There comes a time when it becomes clear that a huge number of these expectations have been overstated, and in fact, life is arranged a little more prosaically. Magic in the full sense did not happen. At this moment, a huge number of startups that were created over there and raised money on those generally unjustifiable illusions are dying. But at this time, someone survives, some big companies pick up a new technology, and slowly it reaches this plateau of productivity, which can last for quite a long time. It is also, of course, because we know examples there, I don't know, some kind of code. How many decades people have invested in the development of chemistry of photographic materials. It was a huge story. It's over. It just ended up like a class. Therefore, of course, this plateau is not infinite, but it can exist for quite a long time. So, where the notorious big dates lived last year. They lived on the slope after the peak. As you can see on the legend on the side, it was assumed that in 5 years they would probably get to such a mass application in the productivity plateau. And suddenly this year Gartner publishes the same picture. The whole world is watching this, including all sorts of investors, people responsible for the strategy of companies. There is no big data, not at all on their new curve. Naturally, the question arises, why? What happened? You know, a strange and amazing event has happened. In just a year, big dates have ceased to be an innovation. What the hell kind of technology? She's not. She's already everywhere. It so happened that we thought it would take 5 years until she penetrated somewhere into the basic things that are traditional and surround us, and took it. In a year, I penetrated. And it has simply become not a part of the technological landscape surrounding us, but not an emerging, developing, and promising technology. She has already given up all hopes, she has started working. It's probably pretty good for you because you're rendering. In some ways it's bad, in some ways it's not bad. You turn out to be specialists, you will find yourself in a few years in what is now becoming not just a kind of hope that in the future it will be required, but an integral part of a bunch of modern technological solutions in a variety of places. But at the same time, there are few of you, because such people, in general, have not been seriously trained. That's why this is another amazing place in which a technology called big data behaved in an unpredictable way. At the same time, I hate the word big data, because it is a marketing term launched by large corporations, SAP, a lot of whom? Microsoft likes to support it in order to sell its large and very expensive, very heavy and often meaningless solutions. In fact, I sincerely hope that what you are doing is related to data science, to normal science, which does not begin only where you have the volumes of data that you work with begin to be measured in petabytes. To hell with him. Data science. It's a way of thinking, a way of working with data. I had a spring conference that we like to hold at Yandex on technologies in marketing. I specifically invited one of my former colleagues who left Yandex to work on his startup. And at Yandex, yes, he learned to think like a person who lives and works next to data sentimentalists. And I asked him to read the report, which he himself called Data Science on his knee. He dispenses with their goals and the simplest scripts, and at the same time, he suddenly makes decisions that competitors cannot understand where they came from. He learned to think like data. And that he does not need a Hadoop at the same time? Well, no need, there is enough purpose. Therefore, in fact, I will continue to try to talk all the time about what changes the data when it begins to influence something. What is data science and how it changes the world around us? And not about the fact that you first give me a cluster of at least 50 to 60,000 processors, and then a few more petabytes of disk space, and then I'll start talking to you. This is bullshit. This is what a person who wants to sell something can say. Well, for example, the very disks on which you will store these petabytes. The scientist doesn't care about the size, the methodology is important to him. And we turn to the methodology. In fact, what is the difference between the data science of all those sciences that humanity has faced before for several centuries? Normal sciences have emerged. Leibniz, I don't remember whether it's in some kind of now. Well, in general, somewhere on the border of the 17th. This is how Leibniz formulated the meaning of science in the 18th century. Everyone seems to have studied higher mathematics here, the surnames are known. I won't explain what the guy is famous for. What if we had enough of our insights of memory and the power of reason in order to? Well, of course, now it can be translated into our modern terms. That if we had enough power of our algorithms, memory and smartness of the program to include all the data around in our model, then we could become the very prophets who foresee the future and understand what will happen next. Such a classic mechanistic model. There's just not enough knowledge, so we can't say anything about the future. We will not say what quantum mechanics did with this in the future in the case of physics, but even just in the case of our ordinary life, in fact, it still seems that science should understand something further and make the future more predictable, and what is happening more accessible to our mind. The classical paradigm of almost any modern empirical science. A little bit not so sta signs. That is, yes, this side of the matter is also there. If we are talking about the classical side and it is very close to business analytics, then there is also such a story around data science. There are people engaged in data science who are really engaged in using colossal computing power, modern good mathematics, but at the same time building models anyway, which they take a decent amount of time to build. Models are not built in a day, it's really months and years, and the result of this is a kind of deep understanding of something. And such an approach, for example, a deep understanding of the market or a deep understanding of the processes taking place within the company, if we are talking about business. Yes, this approach also exists, but in parallel with it, another one appears, which used to be, generally speaking, completely unknown. In this situation, at the initial stage, of course, there is also a person. He must write some algorithms. But then it suddenly turns out that the machine, to a large extent, making specific decisions, already dispenses without a person. A well-trained algorithm.